Hello, everyone. Come on in to Act Now Live. I am Dr. Natalie Phillips.
Hi, everyone. I'm Regeanie Corona.
And we have a really special guest today. But before we get there, we want to just go over some quick logistics. So, Reg, I am going to put up let's do our YouTube right there.
YouTube, yay. We are on YouTube. You guys, please follow us on YouTube, subscribe, go find us at Act Now Guide. And once you find us, subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you are notified every time we drop new content. And I keep saying this, right now we're moving over our show every week, but we are going to start putting more content out, and we're super excited about that. That's on the roadmap for this year. So make sure you find us on YouTube and follow us.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to bring in our guest. Well, actually, let's just preface this by I actually met our guest on Clubhouse, and I know that we've talked about it a lot, but it has been truly amazing just to meet some people that I would have never met otherwise, whether it's popping into different rooms or getting connected because somebody knows somebody else or whatever it is. Reg, are you loving Clubhouse now?
I am loving, well, it's real. I enjoy it, but I have to be very careful. And, I'm very, very protective of my time. And so the first week I was on Clubhouse. It seemed like 24/7, although it wasn't really that much. And I had to scale back, and I really had to say, okay, I'm going to put limits and boundaries in place. But when I am there, I am enjoying it mostly. I do stumble into rooms where there's some very interesting conversations going on. And on occasion, I do have to say, on occasion, I have run into kind of what I call dissing, a little bit of disrespect, a little bit of, that's not cool, and that doesn't feel good. Like I'm a very empathetic person. And when I see that, I immediately leave the room because it feels icky. But mostly, it's a great place to be. And when I tell you hundreds of thousands of dollars in training that you have access to right now, like top coaches and business entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. I was listening to some stuff last night on real estate.
Oh,
it was really amazing.
Wow.
I was just going to say it was in Grant Cardone's 10X room, and it was really good.
Wow. Good. Very cool. We have our good friend Mary Campbell's here. So good to see you, Mary. I'm so glad that you got to join in here. We're just talking about Clubhouse because it's setting us up for a really cool person that I met. And it's not only about trainings too, but it's people just kind of dropping in and dropping gems, here and there, and just giving of themselves. And that's what I'm noticing. And that's what I'm taking out from Clubhouse and my experience. So I'm hoping that other people are getting some good experience, as well as more and more people are coming on to that platform. But without further ado, I would love to introduce our guest. His name is Dean Fox, and I met him on a Clubhouse. And, he had jumped into a room, and it was something that, when he said that he was like a mindset coach and he was talking about some different things, I thought, wow, I kind of want to reach out to him. And again, it's so easy to reach out to somebody and make that connection. And so we spent some time, Dean, I know that you and I spent some time talking, but welcome to the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And so Dean is, I think it's I'm going to let you tell everybody where you're from. Tell us a little bit more about you and what time is it over there that you're joining us?
So, my name is Dean Fox. I'm essentially a mind performance coach for business owners and entrepreneurs. I'm based in the UK, the northeast of the UK. So it's about just after 11 p.m. here. So it's a bit later than you are right now.
Yeah. And I felt so bad. And he's like, oh, no problem at all. I will definitely be on your show and be able to talk. And I was so thankful. So thank you so much.
No, you're welcome. It's a pleasure. Like I said, I've got some clients across in parts of the US and other parts of the world. So I try and be flexible with my diary because my timeline varies differently depending on who I'm coaching that day and where I'm speaking.
Yeah. Well, I would love for you to just introduce yourself a little bit more and tell maybe your story of how you became a mindset coach.
Okay. So I always start by saying to people that, I never intended to be a coach or a speaker. It was not something I set out and planned to do. And the reason I say that is that a lot of times I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to find what we believe is our purpose. I need to find out what it is I'm meant to be doing. And I was a little bit like that for a time. But actually, I'm a firm believer in this idea that we don't find our purpose finds us. It kind of comes along and claims you at whatever the time is right for that to happen. And that's certainly what happened to me. But my background, essentially, I was fairly successful in the corporate world in sales and marketing. I became a national sales manager for a blue chip company in the UK, ran a national sales team with a 7-figure budget, expense account, company car, etc., all the kind of trappings that went with it. And on the outside, most people would think that was, I had a successful career and I was lucky to be where I was. But I never really felt like that. I always felt like, it's a phrase that gets used a lot now, and I'll touch on it in a second. But the way I felt was that that I was going to be found out. I didn't feel like I fitted in. I shouldn't be there. Someone was going to come along and find out that I wasn't who I should be. I wasn't as good. I later learned, as I said, that lots of people call that imposter syndrome, and we struggle with that. And I was talking about this on an event I ran yesterday, and it stemmed for me simply because I never ever believed that I was good enough, that nothing I did would be good enough. I was always looking to prove myself, either to myself or to other people in some way, shape, or form. And I had what I call this when-then mentality. I was forever saying, so when I've been promoted to this level, then I'll be successful. When I earn this much money, then I'll be happy. When I drive this car, then I'll feel good enough. When I own this house, everything was always, the next thing, when then. And that drove me to the point that where, even though on the outside I appeared to have this level of success, I still didn't feel that way. And so I made a decision that the only way I felt I could do that was to leave the corporate world, go into business for myself, and build a successful business. And if I did that, then I would be successful, and I'll feel like I've proved I was good enough. So in the early 2000s, I left the corporate world. My wife and I set up a property business in the UK, so real estate, you guys would call it, so development and investment. And we grew that from the early 2000s to about 2007 to multi-six figures. We were kind of looking at 7-figure business and beyond, and what would that do to our life, and how would we plan for that? That was kind of where we got to, and everything in essence seemed to be going really well. I was starting to feel like, okay, I have proved to myself that I'm good enough to build a business. And then 2008 came along, nobody foresaw what was going to happen with that, the global financial crisis, and in our business, in our industry, it had a huge impact. It was really difficult, and over the kind of following 12 months or so, we ended up losing that business. We went from almost staring at 7-figure business and beyond to virtually no business at all. And alongside that, we lost some other investments at the same time. And that in itself obviously had some financial pressures from a family perspective, but it also kind of raised some of those self-doubts again. So the thoughts that I had about maybe I wasn't good enough started to come back, in terms of, well, you see, maybe that's why this happened, because you're not as good as you think you are. And that, from a kind of mindset and a mental health perspective, that was quite debilitating at the time. But I had to make some fairly serious decisions at that point. And so I said to my wife, look, I think we could probably survive this. We'll just sit and ride it out. And the way to do that is I'll just go back into the corporate world and I'll get a job. It won't be at the level we were at before, but it'll steady the ship and it'll keep us afloat for a short period of time. And we'll see what happens in a few years. And that was my plan. So I made that decision at the end of very late in 2009, early part of 2010. And I started to reach out and look for some opportunities to get back in the corporate world. And then in March 2010, myself, my wife, and my youngest son at the time, we were involved in a road traffic accident, a fairly serious one. Serious enough that the first responders on the scene that day said that they'd said to the when they were asked what equipment they would need on the scene, they said that our vehicle didn't need any attention because none of the people in the car survived. We did survive, all three of us, and that took about 6 or 7 months worth of additional physical recovery from the car accident, which put paid to the fact of me going back into the corporate world. I wasn't able to drive or work physically, and that led to me being ending up being bankrupt, and we came really close to losing our family home. It was the one thing I swore, I said to my wife and family that this will never happen. I'll do anything, but we won't lose the home. And with all of that going on, and then getting towards the end of that year, staring kind of into Christmas, with a family and the expectations that go with that, I found it increasingly difficult from a mental health perspective. I was really struggling. I was feeling really depressed. Couldn't talk to my wife about it. I couldn't talk to my family about it. In fact, I didn't really talk to anybody about it. I just kind of held it inside, and I was really struggling up to that point. So much so that in December of 2010, I got up one morning. It was a morning actually very much like today here in the UK. So it was really cold, but it was a bright blue sky. And I said to my wife that I was going out for a walk. I said I needed to clear my head. I needed to think and plan where we were going to go next, what we were doing. In essence, that was a lie. I'd made a decision that I wasn't coming home. So I left the house. I went to some woodland near where I lived, and I made a decision that I was going to take my own life. I didn't see a way out. I thought that the reason my family was struggling and in the position they were in was my fault, and that they would be better off without me. But I also thought the world would be a better place without me. I didn't feel like I had anything to contribute. And I didn't go through with that day. And at the time, I really struggled to understand what kind of happened. But looking back, in essence, what happened was when I made the decision that that's what I was going to do, I was sitting in some clearing in the woodland. And it's a really kind of weird feeling, but having made the actual decision that I was going to end my life that day, a real kind of calm descended. It was the first time in probably 2 years or so where I felt really at peace. I didn't have any worries. I wasn't stressed. I didn't have any concerns. I just felt really peaceful. And it was in that moment, and I don't know how long that lasted. I don't know whether that was just a split second. It felt like a while, or it could have been a good few minutes. I don't know. But what it did was it gave me, I feel, enough space, if you like, without anything else in my head, to just ask myself a couple of questions. And the key questions were, why am I here? Why am I about to do this? I could have been killed 9 months ago. I could have died in a car accident. In fact, everyone said I should. And I didn't. I survived that. Why was that? Why am I going through all of these things right now? What's my purpose? Why am I doing that? And those questions were enough just for me to say, I feel I need to find that out. I need to try and figure out why that is. And it was no more than that at the time. It didn't have any, express intention of a journey or anything like that. I just genuinely wanted to understand for myself why I felt the way I did. And so I went back home, and a few things happened that kind of, I talk about this idea of sometimes, the previous 2 years I was in what I call a downward spiral, when you kind of get into that mindset of seeing difficulties and hurdles. That's all you see. It just seems to get more difficult, darker. But equally, when you make that shift and you start to see more opportunities or less problems or ways to overcome them, you open your eyes to other things and you start to see more. And so the spiral can go up as well. Mm-hmm. And the starting point for that was that I went back home, and in the office, the home office, we had bookcase full of books that we bought over the years. And I took a book from the bookcase, and the idea was, it was just, I think I was looking for some inspiration. I needed something to kind of a spark. And I took the book from the bookshelf, which was a book my son bought me in 2008 on our last family holiday. It was returning from a holiday. He bought me at the airport for me to read on the plane. And I'd read the book several times before, over various times in my life, and never really got a great deal from it. But I read it that day, and I couldn't put it down, that I saw things in there that I'd never seen in that book before. And I often say now that, when people say, yeah, I get that, I've seen that before. And I'm like, well, now I realize that it was always in the book. It's just I saw things in myself that I hadn't seen before, not so much in the book. So I was in the right space to read it. That book was called Think and Grow Rich. And it started my journey, if you like. I didn't know it was a journey at the time, just to kind of start to figure out some of this stuff for myself. And all that happened really was, as I started to learn more about why we do the things we do, and more importantly for me, why I wasn't doing some of the things I knew I should be doing, I started to understand more about myself. I started to understand more about how our belief systems are formed, how we behave, why we behave the way we do, how some of the things we learn as a child affect us and impact us as an adult. And as that, I started to understand that and do some work on myself and make some changes. Things started to change around me. And I talk a lot about this idea of, when we change the way we look at something, what we look at changes. And that was certainly true for me. When I started to change the way I looked at things, everything started to change. And it was noticeable more so by other people than me. And people would then comment on, I was a different person to what I was 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And I didn't really see it myself. But what happened then was, people started to ask me, how have you gone from where you were, particularly people who knew me, how have you gone from where you were to doing the things that you do now? And I shared some of the things I'd gone through openly, and honestly and truthfully. And they then said, I love your story. It gave me real inspiration. Would you mind sharing it with, some contacts of mine, or some business colleagues of mine, or at my network, or would you come and talk at the school? And that's kind of how that started. And then it snowballed from there. People started to come up to you afterwards and say, what you said really resonated with me. Do you think some of the things that you went through, if you shared what you did, do you think that might help me? And I said, well, yeah, I'm sure it will. Let's have a chat. And I shared some things, and they made changes in their life. And I suddenly realized, and this is where I talk about that, I think our purpose finds us. I suddenly realized that the one thing I enjoyed the most, the one thing that I had a real passion for, was having an impact in somebody else, being there at a time when they needed something. And I look back, and it was probably because that's what I was looking for. When I was in those times, I was looking for someone to turn to, someone to say, why do I feel this way? Has anyone else experienced this? Because I think that we all feel like we're the only one when we're going through stuff like that. I certainly did. I felt like, no one else feels like this. This is just me. And so that's kind of how I ended up doing what I do. And it wasn't by any stretch of the imagination a strategic plan to end up here. I just kind of fell into it. And the more I did it, the more I realized this is what I should be doing. This is why I was here. Not only this is why I'm here, but I realized this is why I went through all those things. Mm-hmm. So, we talk about perspectives and things like that, and mindset. I'm and people will often say, I don't know how you can say this, but I'm eternally grateful to have gone through some of those things. Mm-hmm. Because without them, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, and I wouldn't have the experience and be able to help other people. And so, that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's my story. That's how I ended up doing what I'm doing, and coming from where I came from.
I love it. I mean, that's the second time I heard it, but still, it gave me so much chills, and I've got so much things to say. And I'll talk, but I think I know, Reg might want to have some input in here too. But I love it because what it shows, and we had I continue to have conversations about purpose and why. And, Reg and I talk about it all the time. And and even today, I had a text from a friend, and it was kind of a strange text. He basically reached out and said, if I have if I were to start a business, what kind of business would you see me doing? And I was like, okay, well, I don't think I can really answer that for you. I said, you've got to really look at, is there a problem that you can solve? Right. And is there something because of your skills, your expertise, your passion, everything that goes behind it and your experience? And is it something that you can help, somebody else doing? I said, that's probably going to be where you want to start. And it was a mindset shift for him because he always would see an opportunity and then make his passions actually fit into that. But I love what you're saying, because even though you weren't looking for it, and, with this realization and this brain pause that you were in for however long it was, what I'm hearing is your purpose and your why that came out because you were willing to stop and listen, but then also look outside of yourself and say, whatever I went through, I know I'm supposed to be here. And I know that I'm supposed to use whatever I went through to help somebody else, and that's what shaped where you are right now. And so I absolutely love how, with multiple conversations in the past few days for me around purpose and why, like I can see that in you. I can see exactly your purpose and exactly your why,
And I think that one of the things is that, we try and join the dots looking forward sometimes. We try and kind of plot a path and say, well, if I do this, I think I'm going to end up here, and then that might lead me to this. It's nigh on impossible to join the dots looking forward. It's far easier to join them looking back.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of just go, I'm here, and the reason I'm here is because I went through this, and this, and that led me to this point. So one of the things I've stopped doing is trying to plot a path forward.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean to say I don't have goals and a vision of where I'd like to be. But it was something that Reg said earlier on, actually, about, not knowing the how. I've got some goals that I have no idea how I'll be able to do them yet, but I'm confident that we'll be able to do them. Something will show up at some point. And so I'm a big believer in this idea that, we put too much pressure on ourselves to try and find, okay, what's the next step? What should I be doing now?
Mm-hmm.
I just try and follow and listen, like you said, to, what's my intuition telling me? Where am I being guided to go, and what should I do? And if I feel it's right, then I'll do it. And if I don't feel it's right, then I'll try not to do it. People often talk about, I don't have a very strong intuitive nature, or I don't think that's right. I think we're all have, real strong intuitive nature. I think have very strong intuition. I think the problem for most people is we've either been conditioned, or we choose to ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
We try and push it aside instead of listening to what it's trying to tell us.
I think also so that the notion of conditioning, I do believe that we're conditioned to ignore it. Nowadays it's much more accepted that, okay, it's good to be still and to listen to what your inner self is telling you, because there's something buried in there that you really need to know, you need to hear. But I think we're conditioned to follow sort of the norm, follow what everyone else does to do. And then if internally that doesn't feel right, we end up going kind of against what we intuitively know we should do, because we're opting to do what society says we should do. And that, while it may work for so many others, it may not be the path that we individually are supposed to take.
Yeah. One of the things, I've got two sons, we're both older now, but when they were younger, and they were experiencing some of the things that I'd done, and obviously, benefiting from some of the things I was learning, although it's a lot, I have to say, it's a lot more difficult to kind of coach your children than it is to coach business owners and entrepreneurs, that's for sure. But my eldest son, as an example, I could see early on, what his passion was. I could see what he would be so good at if he would release, that and allow himself to do it.
Mm-hmm.
but he wouldn't, and he tells the story himself now, but over 6 years he had 6 jobs. He just went from one job to another over about a 6-year period. And at the end of the 6 years, he came back and he sat one day and we were just chatting, and he said, I'm not enjoying what I'm doing. And I was like, I could see that a mile off. But what conclusion have you drawn? And he said, I think I want to go back and do what I wanted to do at the beginning, before I started all this. And I said, okay, and what's stopping you doing that? And he was like, well, I don't know if it's too late. I don't know if I'm too old now. I don't know if I've missed the boat. And I was like, well, that's just a list of stories that you're telling yourself or everyone else is telling you. If we put all those to one side and you didn't have all those stories in place, just where you are right now in the space you're in, what do you feel like you should be doing? What would you get up every morning and say, do you know what? I love what I do. And he was like, I want to go back and play golf and coach. And I'm like, then go and do that, because that's what you should be doing. And don't listen to anybody else. And his worry, as everyone, I think everyone's worry at that time is, well, but what if it doesn't work out? And I'm like, you're in your 20s. If it doesn't work out, you've got a whole life to figure out what else you want to do. Don't worry about it. It's, you're putting too much pressure on yourself to say, I need to know exactly what I want to do right now. And his journey, when I look at his journey's full of these synchronicities that he would never have seen at the time. But again, he looks back now and joins some of those dots himself and says, do you know what? I realized that all of those things happened. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing or where I am right now. So even he's starting to understand some of that stuff. It's taken him maybe a few more years than I would have liked to get across to him, but as I expect. But yeah, and I think it's really important that we are conditioned, and we society and so socially, environmentally, and genetically, we're conditioned to believe certain things should be a certain way, and that's not necessarily the case. I was speaking at an event yesterday, and one of the things I talked about was this idea that the number of times I hear people say, I don't like where I live, or I don't like my job, or I'm sick of working here, or I'm sick of living here. And I always answer with the same question, which is, if it was job, for example, I hate working here. I'm like, well, quit.
Exactly.
And it's like, well, I can't do that. I'm like, why? Who said? I don't like living here. Well, move. Go and live somewhere else. Nobody says you have to do these things. But we're conditioned, we're held in these things that we believe that that's the only way things can be.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that also contributes to some of the imposter syndrome that we go through. What you talked about earlier, imposter syndrome is a big issue among a lot of people, and we're afraid to step out and do things because we think, what if someone finds out that I'm not actually this, I'm this, or how am I going to be judged? Or and one of the probably most freeing things that I could have done for myself was to learn not to care what other people think, to just follow along with what I knew intuitively was the thing I was supposed to do. Because people are always going to have opinions, people are always going to judge. You are never going to be all things to all people, and you're not meant to be, and that's okay. But you have to give yourself permission to say, I'm not all things to all people, and it doesn't matter. And what does matter is what's going to bring me joy, what's going to bring me inner peace, what's going to make me happy. Because once I reach that point for myself, then I can turn outward and I can give in a greater way. I can do more and be more. And that's where I can start to have greater impact in the world, and really start to live in my purpose, because I've freed myself from all of this bondage that has held me kind of in a box. And
yeah, and I think we also forget that everybody has an opinion and everyone will give us advice, we also forget that they're giving us opinions and advice based on their conditioning and their belief system. It's not necessarily what's best for us. It's just what they see is their reality, you know, based on their perception of the world. So a bit like you were saying there, Reg, a good while ago now, I've stopped looking at any of those things, you know, because it's impossible. If you showed somebody the same, you know, the same scenario, the same situation, if you showed 5 people, they'd all see it in a different way. So it's about, what do you see? What's important to you, not what everyone else sees. You know, if you can get through that point, then you can start to create and develop what's your reality, and not worry about what everyone else's reality is.
I love that.
And
such a great conversation.
And I talk about this particularly, and you know, Natalie and I spoke about this, but you know, I look back in 2008, between 2008 and 2010. All I saw were obstacles. Everywhere I looked, there was a difficulty, a challenge, and I couldn't see a way around them. Yet in 2008 and 2009, there were businesses that were launched that are now billion-dollar brands today. And I'm like, how is it that I went from, you know, almost a 7-figure business to zero and couldn't find a way back? And yet in the same space, people were turning businesses into billion-dollar brands. It cannot be to do with the environment, the world, the financial crisis. It had to be to do with the way they saw things. And I didn't see them that way. And I use an analogy, and I use it a lot now, because I think it's a great way to help people see what we're talking about, which is that if you imagine you were in the 110-meter hurdles, the Olympic final of the 110-meter hurdles, and you crouch down at the start line, when you look up, all you see are hurdles. The question that the hurdler asks themselves is, are those hurdles in my way, or are they on the way to where I need to be? And it was a huge shift for me, because I was like, these aren't in my way. In 2008, 2009, and 2010, all those hurdles were in my way. I couldn't see anything except them. Whereas now, we're in the middle of a pandemic. You know, there are people losing businesses right now all over the world because of what's happening. And yet there are still businesses being created. You know, I read an amazing article yesterday of a young guy in the UK who's only 20 years old. He works in a hairdresser's. He was furloughed in March last year for a month, and then the potential risk was he would lose his job. And he decided in that 4-week period, I need to do something different. I could be out of work, and I don't know for how long. And he launched an online business selling fitness equipment to people who were at home because of the pandemic during lockdown. And he just turned over, last month was the month where they hit $1 million in sales, in revenue.
Wow.
In 11 months, 20 years old. And all that came from was seeing the same hurdles as everyone else, but he saw them as, actually, this is an opportunity. These are on the way to where I could get. And for me, you know, we misjudge the power of being able to change our perspective and see something differently.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it's so true. It's like we will look at what's ahead of us, and we see the problems and the challenges, and we see them as hurdles in our way. And I always say that those are stepping stones to go to the next level. They're stepping stones to get you to where you have to get to, but you can't really go around them. You have to go through them. And so you have a choice. You can look at them as they are the barriers, or you can look at them as they are just stepping stones. And I'm going to step right over. I'm going to use them to move along. And I think, though, it's hard sometimes for people to come up for air enough to look at those things as not the obstacles, but the stepping stones. And it's easy in retrospect to look back. I mean, I've gone through a lot of things, and at the time I was going through them, they were horrible. But I've always had this positive outlook on things, like there's a lesson in everything. There's something that I am supposed to learn. And whatever it is I'm supposed to learn, if I don't get it, I'm going to go right back through this again until I do get it. So I've always worked very hard to try to see what those things are and to try to learn the lesson. And I think even that, it takes my focus off of how horrible it is at the moment. It's almost like a mind trick where I've taught myself, a Jedi mind trick. I've taught myself that I just have to get on the other side of it. And there's going to be a lesson in it. And I want to know what that lesson is. I want to be able to embrace it and even share it maybe.
That's an important point. I was just about to say, and I agree with you entirely that, every event that happens now, there's a saying that says everything that happens is either a lesson or a blessing. But I agree entirely about it being a lesson, but also I look at it on the basis of this may not be a lesson for me. I might supposed to learn this to be able to give it to somebody else. I'm being taught something that someone else needs to know right now. And if I don't learn the lesson, someone else is going to suffer as well. So, I a bit like you, I use that as well to try and say, okay, I need to get through this because whatever it is on the other side, someone else is struggling with this somewhere, and I'm supposed to be in a position to be able to share this with them.
Right. Yeah, I love that too. And I'm the same way, Reg. And it does take you out of whatever you're going through in that moment into a different perspective right away, right? Because you're looking for that lesson and you're trying to learn it quickly and right so that you don't have to repeat it, number one. But I love what you just added in there, Dean, too, about it. It's not only about me and the lesson I have to learn, but it could be that I have to help somebody else with this lesson that I'm going through right now. So I love that. That's so powerful. Yeah.
And I think that, when I was struggling, and as I started to move through made these changes and do this work, you start to realize some of those things. And it doesn't happen overnight. I'd love to say that, I came back on the December 2010, took a book from the shelf, and my life changed overnight. It's kind of been 10 years in the making since then. And it's funny that, every time we see someone who seems to burst onto the scene, whether it's in music, whether it's in film or whatever, or in business, somebody just seems to burst onto the scene and we all say, wow, where did they come from? But we don't see the kind of 10, 15, 20 years in the background. There was a fantastic video just recently from John C. Maxwell. And he told a story that he'd been speaking at an event. And when he finished the event, he was signing books, and a young guy came up to him and said that he was so inspired by what John had said and the fact that he was speaking on stage that this guy had decided that he wanted to do what John was doing. He wanted to be an inspirational, motivational speaker for leadership. And John Maxwell said to him, "That's amazing. I'm so pleased. But can I ask you a question?" And the guy said yes, and he said, "Well, see, it's not about wanting to do what I do. It's about whether or not you're willing to do what I did." And I was like, "Wow, yeah, that's so profound," because we're all focused on I want to do what they're doing, and it's about but are you willing to do what they did to get to do what they do? That's the difference.
We're often looking at the result, the outcome. But we don't see all that went into the making of that, into getting to that outcome. And we just, we only see the tip of the iceberg. We don't see, that graphic, that picture that's famous. You don't see all of the underneath. And there was just so much for that person to get to where they are. And oftentimes, honestly, there's a lot of heartbreak. There's a lot of heartache, and there's a lot of brokenness that's in that because of the journey, right? There are those things that we see as hurdles or lessons or however you view them and your perspective of them. We all have to go through those things. They look different for each of us, but we all go through some level of that to get to the outcome, to get to the result. And people tend to focus on the result of who we are, not what it took to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a great quote by Rumi that says, people can walk the path with you, but they can't walk it for you.
Yes.
And so, even when I'm coaching, I say to my clients, look, I'll be there every step of the way, but you're going to have to go through this. I'll hold your hand and I'll be there, but I can only walk alongside you. You're still going to have to go through this yourself. I can't stop that happening. That's just the way it is. And you've got to work through those things. But it's interesting, just that point of, are people willing to do the things that you did to get to where you are? So I spoke at an event. I ran an event yesterday. So obviously through lockdown, we're doing a lot of virtual events. So I ran an event yesterday for some of my existing clients and also some new people. And someone said to me at the end, I opened it up for Q&A, and at the end, someone had said to me, I can't believe that you could speak for 3 hours on a subject, and you don't seem to have a great deal of prep or notes, or it just seems to flow. And I said, yeah, but 10 years ago, maybe even longer than that, 15 years ago, if someone had asked me to speak for 20 minutes, never mind 3 hours, I'd have been terrified, literally terrified. And people who knew me then would say, yeah, no, but I've seen you speak, you're very good. And I'm like, but that doesn't matter. It just, all I was doing at that time was putting on a game face. I was able to go out and do something. I wasn't doing it and enjoying it, doing it without, doing it for fun or without any resistance. I was petrified, from the second I stepped up to the time I came off the stage. I just happened to be able to put on a good show. I happened to be able to act pretty well, from that perspective. What's changed for me is that when I understood, the fear that comes with public speaking, for example, when I understood what that is and how that works and how you can work through that, everything changed. So now when I speak, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of what other people think. I'm not afraid to make a mistake. I'm not afraid to say something wrong. I'm not afraid to be challenged. I don't have any of those things, which allows you to speak freely for however long it is without any pressure. And that's the difference, I think, is that, I said yesterday when I spoke, I've coached and worked with some 7- and 8-figure business owners who've been asked to speak, and they say, if I talk for 20 minutes, that's as good as I can be. I can be good for 20 minutes, and then I come off the stage and I just collapse. I fall apart. I fall to pieces. And yet, if you saw them speak, you'd think, wow, they're amazing. But it's just all they've done is practice that bit to say it over and over again. They're very good at acting. But ultimately, they still have the same fear. It doesn't go away because it's conditioned and it stays the same. The behavior pattern just keeps repeating unless you do something about it. And most people don't do enough of the work to end it permanently. All they do is develop some strategy, technique, or coping mechanism to get them through it. But they'll always suffer from it. They'll always feel that over and over again. What I decided to do was I didn't want to do that. I didn't want one of these, short-term strategies that every time I was asked to speak, for example, I had to go through a process to get me to a point where I could do it. I just wanted to be able for someone to say, can you do this? And me say, yeah, sure, plug it in, let's go.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk about some pattern behaviors. You had talked about the fear of public speaking and how you've worked through that. So we're all about taking action. We want people to take action, but people get stuck or people, freeze, like what you said, like what you just kind of went through, but you kind of worked it through. So walk through some common pattern behaviors, I think, that you've noticed and that you coach a lot on to get people to get past this moment and then to be able to take action.
Yeah, sure. I talk a lot about this. So I have what I call the 5 horsemen of the apocalypse. There are 5 behavior patterns that have killed more businesses and more dreams than I can think of in my experience of working with people. They are procrastination, perfectionism, fear of public speaking, fear of rejection, and fear of failure. And those 5 destroy more businesses and more dreams than anything else. And I think the problem is, the first thing I realized was that, because I suffered from a whole range of those over my life. And the first thing I realized as I started to uncover some of this stuff, the first thing I realized is that the biggest problem, starting point, is that it becomes our identity. So the number of times I used to say these words to myself and to other people was, yeah, but I'm just a procrastinator. So I've already assumed the identity.
Yep.
That makes it really difficult to make change. So, because we're now talking about effectively changing someone's personality, someone's identity. And for most people, that's a scary thing to do. That's a big change. Most people, if you said we're going to change your personality or your identity, would say, well, that's going to take ages. How much work am I going to have to put in to do that? And so we're already struggling from that perspective because we've almost convinced ourselves that it's virtually impossible to do. And so that was my first lesson, if you like. My first learning was that, well, actually, that's not who I am. That's not my identity. I may procrastinate, so I may have that pattern of behavior, but that's not who I am. And that was my first mind shift, if you like, was, okay, it's just a pattern. It's just behavior. It's just actions. It's not who I am. It's not my identity. And then I started to look at, okay, so if it's a pattern of behavior, there must be ways that we can change it. And how does it keep repeating? So in my example, I would, using procrastination as an example, because I've suffered with that as well. I would do things like I'd read a book and I'd read some great tips or strategies of overcoming procrastination, or I'd go to an event and hear somebody talk, or I'd, study a program, or I'd get a coach or whatever it was. And I got lots of different techniques along the way. And what would happen was I'd start implementing them. Things would improve. I'd be thinking, oh, I've cracked this. I'm okay. I can take action now. And then 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks later, 2 months later, 3 months later, whatever it was, I'm back to square one again. And it's something I learned reading. I read a book called Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. And one of the things he said in there really struck a chord with me. He has this concept called the snapback effect. And he has an example of an elastic band, is that when you stretch an elastic band, when you let go of it, it snaps back to where it was before. So you can stretch it and try and change its shape, but ultimately when you let go, it'll always snap back. And what I realized was happening was that if we try these short-term strategies and techniques, we stretch the elastic band. But ultimately, you can only hold the elastic band out here for so long. Eventually, you have to let it go. You can't hold that forever. You have to let it go. And when you let it go, it snaps back to where it was before. The only way to do that is to break it completely. And I was all about trying to figure out, okay, so how does that work then? How can we break it completely? And what does happen? How do we end up that way? And in my process of trying to figure these things out, as you've probably gathered from some of the analogies I talk about, I'm really big on trying to figure out easy ways to work things out and explain it to people. And so one of the things I learned was I was playing Jenga. So I think it's called the same. It's a kind of wooden block game where you remove the blocks and stack them up. I was playing it with my wife, and something occurred to me just while we were playing it, was that inside that tower, there are a set number of blocks. So if we imagine that tower is procrastination, that's our pattern of behavior. There are a set number of blocks inside that pattern that support it. Without it, it wouldn't exist. And the other thing I learned was that you can take some of those blocks out and it will become unstable, but it doesn't fall down, it doesn't collapse. And so what I started to realize was that's what's happening to me, is that I'm taking away some of these blocks by doing some work, going to an event, reading a book, learning from a coach, whatever it was. I'm taking away some of these blocks, but the tower doesn't collapse. And so if it still stands, that pattern of behavior still stands. It may be a little bit weaker than it was before, but it's still there, which means that I'll always come back to it at some point. I'll always default back to that pattern. And the only way to destroy that and make sure I never do that again is if the pattern collapses, if the tower collapses. And there was two things that happened as I was thinking about that. One was my first reaction was, great. So first of all, if I worked out every block that there was in that tower and I removed all of the blocks, then the tower wouldn't exist. And I was like, okay, great. that's a solution. I just need to figure out what all the blocks are in that pattern of behavior and take them all away, and I won't have that pattern anymore, and I'll be fine. So I did that. That was one of my first things. Was I tried to figure out what are all the blocks inside that pattern. And the only way to do that for me was I learned from some people along the way, some other coaches. I've worked with people from all over the world, everything from people like Tony Robbins and Bob Proctor, through to people that, people in the UK like Cy Gilbert and Morty Lefko and all sorts of people from all different genres, if you like, just to try and figure out what it was. But also, every time I coached someone, I try and write a list of things that they said to me, contributed to that pattern. So, okay, what is it you believe? What's blocking you doing that? And we ended up with a list. And over time, I collated this list into 19 for one of those patterns. So there were 19 things that virtually everyone I'd spoken to had some combination of those 19. But then I had a real light bulb moment, which was, okay, but if we go back to the Jenga tower, if we took all 19 away, yes, the tower would collapse. But actually, there's about 6 or 7 blocks in there that if I just take them out, the tower still collapses.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, okay, so if we could just figure out what the 6 or 7 blocks were, then I wouldn't need to do all 19. I just need to work out which ones were the problem. And so when I'm working with people, that's what I do. Because what I also realized was we don't all have the same combination. It's like trying to crack a safe.
Mm-hmm.
19 are the common ones. But Natalie might be struggling with, if we had a list of 1 to 19, Natalie might be struggling with 1, 3, 7, 9, and 10. I might be struggling with 3, 4, 9, 12, 17, and 19. And so it's an individual personal code. And until you work out what that is, you can spend forever trying to, take blocks away, and it's still there. So that's why clients come to me and say, well, I've tried to do this before. One of my clients I'm working with at the minute, he spent 10 years of his life trying to get to take action on certain things and never really got the results he was expecting, and always ended up going back to, I can't do this, I'm struggling, I don't take the actions I need to. And I'm like, well, now you understand why. So let's figure out I know what the 19 are, let's figure out which ones affect you. It's rare. I've never ever come across anyone I've coached who's got all 19. Most people have got 2 or 3 that I could probably say straight off the bat affects everybody. But other than that, they're all different because they're all based on our experience. Mm-hmm. They're all based on the things that we've been conditioned, based on what we've been exposed to. And, most people will know that, it's widely understood now that our identity, for want of a better phrase, is kind of formed by the time we're about 6 or 7 years old. Mm-hmm. After that, all we do is look to validate those things to be true for the rest of our lives. We try and prove them to be true. And so if we can understand what they are, we only need, Reg said this earlier, all we need to do is understand what they are, which blocks they are, where did they come from, and then we can start unpicking them. And as soon as we unpick the 5 or 6 or 7 there are, the tower collapses. And then you make really rapid change. And I describe it sometimes as like peeling the layers off an onion. And when people say, what does your coaching work? Will I get the same sort of changes? I say, look, this is just my opinion of things. My coaching will not change you. It's not designed to do that. It's actually designed to reveal who you really are. Because who you really are, it didn't have all of those beliefs and conditionings in the first place. You learned those, they were all learned. So when you were born, if you put up, I have a pyramid of performance, rating from 10 at the top of the pyramid to 0 at the bottom. And I say to people, if 10 was the best version of you and 0 is the worst version of you, where do you pitch yourself? And most people, I did this yesterday in an event actually, most people come out somewhere between 4 and 6. Mm-hmm. That's just nature. But actually, we were born as a 10. We didn't have any of those issues when we were born. We didn't believe any of the things we do now. So all of those things are learned, which means if they were learned, we can unlearn them. Mm-hmm. So long as we know what they are in the first place. And that's the biggest challenge. That was my biggest challenge, was first of all, what are they and which ones affect me? Mm-hmm. And then when you figure that out, you can start to say, okay, now I know what they are. Let's just work on them. Mm-hmm. And so, when people come to me, when my clients come to me, I'm not interested necessarily in, what industry they're in, what their background is. I'm only interested in, do you have this pattern of behavior? Have you struggled with this pattern of behavior? And if you do, then we can work on it and solve it. Because they're the same for everybody, essentially. The top 5 are the same for everybody. And the other thing is that because we're kind of peeling away the layers of an onion, you often find that when you do that, you expose something else.
Yeah.
So I quite often have clients who come to me and they'll say, I'm really struggling to take action, for example. I put off doing the things that I know I should do. And this is the other thing I think you probably find this as well. But I think that, about 95% of people in business know exactly what they can do to improve their business starting tomorrow. But equally, about 95% of them wouldn't take the action tomorrow that would make change in their business. And so most people come to me and say, I know if I did this, this, and this, it would probably have an impact in my business. And then I'd say, okay, and so why are you not doing this, this, and this? I'd say, well, and then we try to uncover what it is. But usually what happens is we end up dealing with that. And then they'll say, that's amazing. I've taken all this action and this is happening. But I now realize that, this came up and I'm afraid to do this, or I feel uncomfortable about this. And then we start talking about that. So that's kind of how it came about. And it's also how I kind of use it to try and help people understand why we do the things we do. And more importantly, why we don't do some of the things we know we should do on an ongoing basis.
That's so, I know, that's just
That's
so
some good stuff.
fascinating. I could sit here forever.
I know, I love this. This is the kind of stuff that I work with young adults on. And my whole goal on that side of the work that I do when I'm coaching, it's not to tell them what to do to fix themselves, because I can't do that really. Because it's like what you described with the rubber band. They may go implement a couple of things, and then they're just going to go back to the same patterns. What I really try to do is help them learn how to look within and begin to understand why they do what they do, so that they can begin to address the things that cause them to do what they do. And I do that with adults as well with my clients, but I do it more with the young adults that I work with through the nonprofit. And it's probably one of the most difficult areas to address. But I do that with young adults because I just hugely believe in the fact that if they're given those tools at a younger age, then they can cope with what comes along the way. They can start to address those issues that are standing in the way of them doing some of the things that they dream about doing. And all of a sudden it unlocks this sort of amazing thing. And I've seen the results of that, and it really gets me excited and lights me up. So this topic is one that is so exciting for me. And I just have this feeling that I see Mary is still on with us. She is heavily on my mind as we're having this conversation, because I believe that there's value. There's value for everyone, but I think that there's something in it for her. And I, just because I know her a little bit, I've known her for a little while, but this is such, it's such an important discussion in helping people to move past being stuck. And it does take more work, and it takes working with someone that can come alongside you and help you to understand, because you do need those tools to help you.
Yeah, I say a lot this idea that, when people say the process that I use, once you get to know it, and I say this to my clients, once you get to know this, you can go away and use this. So every time you come across something that you develop some sort of emotional reaction in you, you can start to ask yourself the question, okay, what must I believe about what I'm doing in order to feel the way I feel? And once you understand what it is that you believe, then you can use the same process to work on that belief. That's the way, and you can do this. You can learn the process, and often they'll come back and say, "I know, but I prefer it when I work with you." And the reason for that, and I talk about this openly, is that it's not that I have anything extra special than they have, but often when I use an analogy again, but when you're in the picture, it's really difficult to see the frame. So sometimes when you identify, I've had previous clients come back to me and say, okay, I've got a problem with this. I've identified this as the belief. I'm really struggling with it though, and we'll go through the same process that I've taught them that they will use, and it's successful, and they say, oh, why couldn't I do it? And I'm like, all it is you've got someone else asking you the questions. It's a different perspective. You're viewing it from a third party rather than from being in it all the time. And sometimes that's all you need. And the other thing is that sometimes I think that from a coach's perspective, all we need to do is, there's a great quote by Tony Robbins about asking better questions. I think that's all we do. We just ask the right questions to get them to provide the answer, so that they can see it a little bit differently, change the perspective and allow them to see it differently. And so the other thing I think is really important is that when we're talking about, how we get conditioned in our beliefs and things like that, one of the things that I've really discovered as well is that not always are those beliefs developed under some kind of hugely traumatic experience. And so sometimes people are looking for, something in their childhood. When we talk about, our beliefs are usually formed by the time we're about 6 or 7 years old. People are looking for some hugely traumatic experience that caused that. And often it's not. It's usually very, what I would call very innocuous. It's just the repetition of some sort of events. And I use my own son as an example. My eldest son. One of the things when we did get to do some work together, one of the things he was struggling with was he developed a belief that people weren't interested in what he had to say. So he didn't speak up very often. And what was interesting about that was, by that time I already understood some of this stuff. I'd worked out how those sorts of things develop and how it happens. But what was interesting was, if you have a belief that people aren't interested in what you have to say when you're 5 years old, it doesn't really make a huge amount of difference. You're just deemed as being a little bit more quiet, or, you're a shy child, but if you've got a belief that people aren't interested in what you have to say when you're in your mid-20s and you're working in a sales or a business environment, then that's a big issue, because you're not going to go out and talk to people because you're afraid that people aren't interested in what you have to say. So why bother? And so that was what led to us doing some work. And what we discovered as an example was we uncovered where his belief came from. And his belief that people weren't interested in what he had to say came from the fact that during his childhood, I spent, as I said, I had a fairly successful corporate career, but I spent most of my time working from home. I had a home office. So even long before pandemic, I spent, most of my time at home if I wasn't traveling. So although I had an office, I rarely went there. I either worked from home or I was traveling somewhere. And when I was working from home, he, as any child would do at that age, was hugely excited that I was in the house to start with. And every time he did something which he felt was amazing, he would bring it to me, a drawing, a picture, something he'd found in the garden, the fact that he could, kick a ball, or whatever it was that he'd done as a child that he found super exciting, he brought to me. And he would walk into the office with, huge excitement about whatever he was about to tell me. And my initial reaction, 99 times out of 100, was to go, I'm at work, quiet, I'm on the phone. And he would leave the office. Now, I didn't know any better. I was just telling him that I was busy. I was on the phone. I didn't shout at him. I wasn't super angry. I just explained to him I was busy. But you can see how, as a 4 or 5 year old, there are only kind of 3 things that he can use to make judgments about, the events that happen to him. So one of those is to ask himself, And we do this unconsciously. It's not a conscious thing that he does as a 4 or 5-year-old, as an example, but unconsciously he will have said, so that makes me feel not very good. I don't feel very good about that. My dad's just told me to leave, basically, and I don't feel very good about that. Is that because of the environment that I'm in? Do I feel that way because of where I am? And the answer to that is obviously no, because he's at home and he's experienced love and joy and happiness there as well. So it's not the environment's fault. The next question would be, well, is it my dad's fault that I feel like this? And as a 4 or 5-year-old, the answer to that will always be no, it isn't. Because he's the all-knowing adult. He knows everything. I have to look up to him. He's teaching me everything. So it's not his fault. And that leaves only one other option. Then it's my fault. And once you internalize the blame to say, well, the reason I feel like this is because of me, then there needs to be a reason for that. And the more it happens, you just get to a point where he'd assumed that, well, actually, my dad's not that interested in what I've got to say. And then it transfers from being my dad isn't interested to nobody's interested in what I have to say. And that transfers to people aren't interested in general. That becomes a huge issue when you're older in life. But it came from something that's relatively simple. And when you can go back and find what they are, knowing what that belief is, and unpick it to a point where he can see, well, actually, I made that up. That didn't really happen that way. Nobody ever said that to me. My dad didn't say that to me. That wasn't ever in the conversation. My interpretation of what happened was what led to me believing these things. And when you understand some of those things and you can change the way you look at it, then we can change the way that the belief feels, and then ultimately change the belief. And that's what happens when we start to pick away at some of those blocks, some of those beliefs that support those patterns. And so
reframing beliefs is so important when you're doing this work. It's so important.
And I think that the biggest lesson for me in all of that was that from a parent's perspective, my 2 sons, as I said, are older now, so we don't have that opportunity. But I'm now looking at, when we have grandchildren, I'll be super mindful of how we talk to them and how we interact, because we're having such an impact at such an early age that we can create all sorts of things for them in the future. And so, that's something I talk about a lot. A simple shift in my language at the time could have completely changed his perspective, and he might never have believed that. If instead of just saying, I'm on the phone, I'm busy, if I just said to him, if I'd welcomed him in to start with and said, well, that's super exciting, that's amazing, but I'm working at the minute, I'm really busy. Could you give me 5 minutes and I'll come out and we'll have a look at it together, because I think it's really good. He would have gone away thinking, oh, great, everything's fine. My dad thinks this is fantastic and he's going to come and talk to me in a minute. And so long as you follow through on that, then you actually do deliver, then he's not going to grow up with that belief.
Right. Wow. This is so amazing. Dean, thank you so much for being here. I love everything that you've talked about. I want people, if they're interested, if they're not in Clubhouse and they can't connect to you, will you let people know how they find out about you and where to go?
Sure. They can get me at my website, which is deanfoxcoaching.com. Or they can reach out to me on Instagram or on Facebook. I'm on both of those, just at Dean Fox Coaching.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think that it's really important. And I was listening as a mom, but I was also listening as a business person working from home as well, and thinking, okay, so my note is to make sure that now that we've looked back at what you've done, make sure that I say certain things so that my kids will not have to go work with Dean Fox.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you were able to spend so much time. And I know, we didn't really, set a time or anything like that. And it was such great conversation. And you had so many great points that I kind of wanted it to keep going. But, I want to be really respectful of your time. And there are people that hung in the whole time with us. So thank you guys so much. And I know some of the feedback that we're getting is that it's such great conversation. Maybe at some point we can have you back on again.
Yes.
I would love that. I think that, you are very wise and you're very helpful. And the way that you see things and the analogies you use have even helped me to be able to see, how to shift the way that I see things and how important it is. So I thank you. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. I say this to every time I get an opportunity to speak to people and connect with people. Firstly, I'm always thankful and grateful for anybody's time. It's our number one asset, and for people to give it up and allow me into that space is I'm always grateful for that. But also, we never know if we'll come along at the right time for somebody, and so I just hope that we get an opportunity to share on the basis that we might come along at the right time for somebody else, and they may pick something up and be able to use it, and we get to play a part in their journey, and that's that's worth more than anything else. So
yeah, absolutely.
It's been a pleasure. I'm really grateful that we got to connect on Clubhouse and chat further.
I am too. And this is not going to be the end. I know for sure. I absolutely adore you and what you're doing for everybody and just your story. And thank you so much for being so open in sharing your story, because I think that's an important piece of what you're doing right now. So
it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Well, great, Dean. Thank you.
Well, with that, you guys, we are going to say goodbye, and we will talk to Dean. If you guys want to see Dean back on too, let us know. But we are going to be back next week as well, Sunday. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and staying with us. I think it was great conversation as well. Thank you, Dean, so much. I know it's about midnight where you are right now. So we really, really, really appreciate you for being here and giving us your time. All right. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye, everyone.